I like Xenoblade. I know, shocking revelation that it may be, I am quite a big fan of the series. It is my favorite game series of all time. So let's rank them, yeah? I got tier, make a link in the description down below to the one I'm using, but let's make a tier list, if you will, of all the Xenoblade games. Don't worry, I'll put a PNG for 3 when we get there. And in this video, we're going to go into detail about why I put each game in its specific ranking. And as a little bit of added context, if you will, maybe a little bit of nuance, this is in regards or relation to the other Xenoblade games. So I'm not saying if I put a game in D tier, that's a D tier game overall. Just in comparison to the other Xenoblade games. And this is only for my opinion, yours may differ. So leave a comment down below with your own rankings. Let's get right on into it, shall we? So let's start off with Xenoblade 1, and I'm gonna put the base game and 3D in the same ranking for Definitive Edition, mainly I haven't played the original or the 3DS version. However, 3D, I mean, come on, it kind of fits, let's be honest here. So where would I put Xenoblade Chronicles 1? Personally, if I had to put it somewhere, I would put it in an S tier. So let's put Xenoblade 1 straight into S tier. Why is that? Does the game have its faults? Absolutely. I don't think it's a perfect game. No game is. However, the visual design, the world building, the characters, the character development, the cast of characters overall, the story itself, the metaphors, the pacing, the music, the dialogue, the voice acting. It is all so perfectly executed and implemented into the experience that is Xenoblade Chronicles 1, that it creates one of the most cohesive and engaging video games that I've ever played. I keep liking the game more and more the more I play of it. The appearance system, especially in Definitive Edition, in my opinion, is by far and away the best appearance system in all of Xenoblade Chronicles, one that I don't know why hasn't become standardized for future releases. It rewards going off the beaten path and finding extra vendors or defeating certain mobs to hopefully get different drops, because I want to collect all those different appearances so I can make my own sets. The customization overall, in my opinion, is the best in all of Xenoblade. I love the gem mechanic, I love gearing, and I love the talent system. Grinding Affinity can be a bit of a tedious grind. However, the customization that comes out of that is really fun and engaging to me, because each character can go for multiple different builds, so there's always a breath of fresh air in the combat. I can always just swap character, or even just swap various arts around, or my gems, and a different gameplay experience and a gameplay loop. I can customize the builds that I need on a per fight basis, and I really appreciate that out of an RPG like Xenoblade Chronicles. Now let's cover Future Connected. Personally, I think Future Connected is fine. I think visually it's a really impressive game, and I'm glad that it exists. I think it wraps up the Melia story dang near perfectly, and gave me exactly what I wanted as a send-off for the character of Melia. However, if I'm comparing it directly to the other Xenoblade games, I do prefer them overall. So I'm personally going to put it in C tier. Again, this is just in relation to the other Xenoblade games. I think the gameplay and customization was a little bit weaker because I missed the chain attack system. The pawn specters are a great mechanic, I love them. The two no pawn Netariki's kids are great. They really did a good job of making me care about those characters. The stuff with Tyrea is really great, especially in regards to her relationship and dynamic with Melia. Really breathed more personality and individuality into that character that I barely remembered from Xenoblade 1's base game. Quiet moments for me are a step up from Xenoblade 1's base heart-to-hearts, and I love the addition of voice acting to them. But I think most of the side characters were just kind of fine, so that's why it's going to go into C tier. It's a good experience, just I prefer the other ones. So let's get into Xenoblade Chronicles 2. And if you've seen my top 10 list of games of all time, you know this game's going to be #1 spot for me, because I love Xenoblade Chronicles 2. I love it unabashedly so. It is my second favorite game of all time, and my favorite Xenoblade game of all time, for a variety of reasons. My favorite cast of characters combined with my favorite world. I love all rest. My favorite theme and message of Xenoblade Chronicles. I love the concept of chasing Elysium and how that whole story resolved itself. I think it has the best villains or antagonists in the entire series. Jin and Malus and Amalthus were really engaging characters that bounced off of and worked really good as counterparts for Rex as a character. I found the driver-blade dynamic to be a very interesting one, whose story was really fleshed out and engaging to me. I have a lot of fond memories for Xenoblade 2, but they formed because the game appeals to a lot of my interests in terms of storytelling, and I think the gameplay loop of Xenoblade 2, yeah, it takes a while to get into, but it ends up being my favorite combat system of any Xenoblade game and one of my favorite combat systems out there. There's a certain flow in the combat where you're applying these elemental orbs and then popping them in the chain attacks that I found really satisfying and engaging, that made me want to experiment with different blade combinations. Sure, acquiring blades was kind of gacha BS for me, but once you had them, I really enjoyed their own individual storylines. How they had the hot-to-hot system. Speaking of hot-to-hot, Xenoblade 2, in my opinion, does the hot-to-hot system the best of any Xenoblade game. You can have multiple party members, not just two, that are in dynamic and varied environments that change up the visual aspect of them. Plus, the voice acting, and I really like the voice acting of Xenoblade 2. Sure, it's a bit cringy now and then, due to subpar voice direction, but overall, I still think it has a lot of life and character and breathes that into these characters. Not to mention, personally, the ending of Xenoblade 2 is my favorite ending and one of my favorite endings to any video game out there. Rarely has an ending of a video game ever made me feel a range of emotions like Xenoblade 2's did, and I really do appreciate that about it. So let's move on to Torn of the Golden Country. Now, some people will say that Xenoblade 2 Torn of the Golden Country has better combat than Xenoblade 2, and I would disagree. I thought the same initially, but on repeated playthroughs of Xenoblade 2, I prefer the base combat. However, the combat for Torna fits for a game that's supposed to take you about 20 to 25 hours. It's still fun and still engaging, and I think Torn of the Golden Country has an ending that is on par with Xenoblade 2 in my opinion. It's really good, and how it flows and transitions into the base game perfectly. The events of Torna recontextualize a lot of the events from 2 and make them more engaging, more complex, multi-dimensional, while also fleshing out the character development and backstories for various characters to make the game and the world feel more vibrant and active. And I really appreciate that about Torn of the Golden Country. Having said that, while I like the side quests of Torna, the fact that the end of the game was community level locked is really annoying to me. Especially when I try and go back and play through the game again, and the game essentially forces you to do all those side quests that you've done before, when I may just want to streamline the main story. And unless I watch the cutscenes in the event finder, or the event viewer, I can't do that. So for me, I'm gonna put Torn of the Golden Country into A tier. The story itself is an S tier story in my opinion, with one of the best endings I've ever experienced. However, there's just certain decisions surrounding Torna that knock it down 1 tier for me. And while I think the story overall is really good and compelling, a large reason why I love Torna so much is just the ending. The rest of it I would say is probably an A tier story. So this is like high A for me, borderline S tier. If you caught me on a different day, I might even say S. Now the next one is Uncontrollable. I have made numerous videos before about how much I love and adore Xenoblade Chronicles X's world. It's expansive, it's vibrant, it's diversified. It's one of the best open-world experiences of any game that I've ever played, and that holds true to the modern day. Every time I play Xenoblade Chronicles X, I wonder how the heck they made this thing run on the Wii U. It's gorgeous to look at, I love the soundtrack, I haven't heard a song that I dislike on it, yes, including the new LA themes. I kinda like those, I'm not gonna lie to you. And the skill mechanic is arguably one of the best mechanics, gameplay-wise, in all of Xenoblade Chronicles. It changes the way you interact and view and play through the game, and just the world overall. So when you've just explored one zone, you may get the scale, which changes the way you interact and view it, and opens up new areas to you. And then you get flying, that has its own theme song, and again, changes the way you fundamentally play the game, and opens up so much other stuff around the world to explore, like Sky Islands and stuff like that. It's really cool. Those giant vistas you've seen throughout the entire game that you wanted to get to, but you couldn't find a way, now you can just fly them. Oh, hey, wait a minute, there might be a super boss in there. That's cool. That's really cool, and I love the fact that Xenoblade X just took a bunch of risks, gameplay-wise, and ran with it. It's so good. Having said that, it is my least favorite story in the franchise. It's not bad, but it's just not fleshed out or developed as much as the other games, including Future Connected. Tatsu might be the only character I would borderline say is a character that I don't like in all of Xenoblade games. The comedy rarely ever gets me unless it's revolving around Vandom, because 90% of the comedy in this game revolves around making the same food joke about Tatsu, which gets old immediately after the first word of the first sentence is spoken in relation to that joke. But the world of Mira is also one of the most interesting locations in all of Xenoblade, so it's a bit of a trade-off. where I wish we had just more development for this world. Having said that, I haven't beaten X, though I'm getting really close. I'm at chapter 10 right now. And I know a few of the events to come, spoiler-wise, including the ending, which I kind of know, and I already know that I'm not going to like the ending in all likelihood. It is a game that is crying out for a sequel or a follow-up of some kind, but without that, the story overall just kind of falls flat in my opinion, with only a handful of characters that I particularly really care about, like Elma, or Vandam, or Lau. Really only a handful of characters. It is a game that is hard carried by its mechanics and its overall world design, in my opinion. And for that, that keeps it out of the D and C tier for me, but I would put it in B tier because of that. It is one of the best mechanics and gameplay interactions in all of Xenoblade game. In that regard, it's S. However, for me, the story and what I want out of a story, and what I'm looking out of a story, which is characters and plot development, I just don't really get much that satisfies me in that regard. So for me, I'll put it in B tier. Now, Xenoblade Chronicles 3. It is a game of some of the highest highs in all of Xenoblade, and some of the lowest lows as well. Chapters 1 through the end of Agnes Castle section in Chapter 6 is some of the best Xenoblade has to offer. It is expert. However, having said that, I did make a video not too long ago about my biggest critique of Xenoblade 3, which was the overall pacing of that final leg of the game, most of Chapter 6 and Chapter 7, where I felt like it was a little bit too rushed and hurried along without enough time to properly develop that portion of the game to really get me invested to go into Origin, and Origin itself was kind of lackluster in my opinion, and I never particularly cared that much about the character of Zed. That's kind of the point of the character, but it's also an archetype of a character that I don't really enjoy. I enjoy, though, swapping characters in mid-combat. That is a really enjoyable aspect of Xenoblade 3's combat loop that I'll always enjoy, because it ups the pacing overall and gives me more control over each scenario as the player, which I enjoy. The progression of gaining a new hero, unlocking its class for everyone else, while then getting a new hero, is a satisfying loop that keeps you perpetually unlocking something while you're playing the game initially, that keeps me hooked and engaged to the overall product. Where I always feel like I'm achieving something or unlocking something new, I always have a secondary objective outside of the story that I can pay attention to and want to actively level up, where even when I'm not playing the game, I can log off for the day and think, okay, next time I play, this is what I want to do. This is what I want to unlock. I want to unlock it for this character, so I can get this master skill, this master art I can use for this other class. I think the side questing content and side content overall in Xenoblade 3 is the best in the franchise. They flesh out the world and the cast of characters and make it all just come together into a cohesive whole that I find really fun and engaging, while offering good and substantial rewards like upgrading your classes, giving you additional affinity, which unlocks various other benefits depending upon which colony you're leveling up that affinity for. A good shorthand for Xenoblade 3 in a lot of ways is that it takes a lot of the good aspects of Xenoblade games beforehand, brings that into the new game with Xenoblade 3, and leaves behind a lot of the clutter and the bad aspects and leaves those behind. However, that isn't universal. I think the heart-to-heart system in Xenoblade 3 with the campfires is by far the worst. It's the worst heart-to-heart system in Xenoblade, in my opinion, because they're not voiced, and they're all around that one campfire, which limits the cinematography and limits the aesthetic variety that you see, because they're all just clustered around various campfires. You don't get differing locations and interesting scenarios that can happen, like in Xenoblade 2, or you can even argue Xenoblade 1. And I think narratively-wise, my main issue with the pacing in the back end of the game is a pretty substantial one when I'm talking about comparing this game to the other ones. It's still a top 10 game of all time for me, because I really enjoy Xenoblade 3, however, those flaws still do exist for me. And my opinions on the ending and whether or not I like the ending is almost entirely dependent upon where the story goes from here. I think it's a really cool ending for now, but again, I need to see where the story goes from here and how and what exactly happens. And I do have one major critique about the gameplay loop overall, and that is I feel that the enemies don't do enough. A lot of the combat and the onus on each fight falls on the player, and the mechanics that the player brings to each fight, whether or not they can outlive the damage that each boss does and stuff like that. I would have liked to have seen some more mechanics come out of each individual monster or enemy that I have to counter or interact with, or learn what this fight does uniquely to counteract it. Maybe some of the super bosses force you to do that, but I got interesting mechanics through the story bosses in Xenoblade 2, and sometimes in Xenoblade 1, and just never got that here with Xenoblade 3. and the exclusion of having the expert mode unlocked until after you beat the story makes it so you can easily outlevel the game, which can limit a lot of the interesting challenge that could even be there to begin with. I couldn't tell you a thing that Zed does as a fight. I legitimately don't know because I decided to do some side content in the game, so I outleveled him, and I just absolutely rolled through Zed like a freight train. I barely remember what that fight even did, or if it had any mechanics. With Xenoblade 1 and 2, I could just de-level to make sure I had an interesting fight on my hands, but I don't get that with Xenoblade 3, because they made that decision to lock expert mode off until post-game or New Game Plus, and I don't get why they did that. So for me, I'm going to put Xenoblade Chronicles 3 in A tier. It has a lot of things for Xenoblade Chronicles that I consider to be the best in the series. However, there are a few flaws in the overall experience for me that prevents it from putting it on par with Xenoblade 1 and 2 for me. So that's my tier list. I hope you all enjoyed it. Leave a like and subscribe if you did, and I'd love to hear your thoughts and hear your opinions. Hit the bell icon to be notified for when I upload in the future. Stay safe, everybody. Have a great day. Hope to see you all again next time. Go play some video games if you can. And I'll see you all next time. Bye-bye, everybody.